right, welcome everyone. I'm Pete Fishman. I go by Fish. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Mozart Data. Thanks for joining us today. The topic is how to choose the right ETL tool. But before we begin, I've got just a few announcements. One, we'll be sending out a recording of today's discussion. So if you can't attend the whole entire thing, this will go out tomorrow. Two, we'll be taking live Q&A, certainly at the end, but also feel free to submit questions that we can sort of interject throughout the webinar. But important, we'll definitely spare some time at the end for questions. Lastly, so this goes sort of my past life. I'm rocking, I got Blur on, but I'm rocking an Ease coffee mug. Today is April 20th or 420. So, you know, in my past life, I was in Canalytics, and we're gonna do some giveaways in honor of 420. So we'll be doing, first of all, for those who might have some munchie issues, we're giving away two $100 DoorDash gift cards to 2 lucky winners, and then 2 other winners will win an Upright Analytics hockey jersey. So pretty awesome prizes being shown off as we speak by Lauren, who I'll introduce just shortly, but needs no introduction. So live random drawing. The winners, of course, will be at the end of the webinar. So now let me get to some introductions. I've already sort of mentioned that Lauren is joining us, but I'll start here. First, we have Lauren Ballack. Lauren is the founder and owner of Upright Analytics, a data advisory and consulting firm based in New York City. She and her team build scalable cloud data solutions with organizations ranging from the Fortune 500 to startups and everywhere in between. We also have Ethan Aaron. Ethan is the co-founder and CEO of Portable, the first ELT solution to build connectors on demand for clients. Portable builds custom no-code integrations from business applications to Snowflake, BigQuery, and Redshift, enabling data teams to focus on business insights instead of infrastructure. Lauren and Ethan, welcome.
Thank you for having us. Excited for the conversation.
Good to be here.
Yeah, I think so. A couple of things. You know, this is meant to be a 45-minute webinar where we will save 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. I think the three of us could fill up volumes on this exact topic, but I want us to start just with the basics. Just dissect even the title of this webinar for me. What is ETL and what is an ETL tool? So maybe we start with just what is ETL, and maybe I'll turn actually first to Ethan on this. What is ETL or ELT or EL? What are those things?
Totally. At the highest level, most things in the data ecosystem come down to, in most scenarios, building dashboards. You're the CEO of a company and you want data at your fingertips. You want to understand how many customers you have, how many employees you have, who's at risk of churning, who's at risk of turnover, who your highest value customers are. ETL and ELT tools make that data from your various systems, your CRM system, your databases, et cetera, accessible at your fingertips so that you can build those dashboards. So you can focus on what insights you should expose instead of trying to figure out how to extract data from APIs or files, things of that sort. It's really just a simpler way to get access to data across the enterprise.
That makes sense. Lauren, any sort of additional sort of thoughts on, one, what an ETL tool is or ELT tool? And I think we should just stop using the T, moving it all around. Let's just refer to that as EL, which refers to extract and load. So what is sort of an EL tool, and like why, Ethan mentioned some of the end game of it. Why is it that they've become prevalent, and give us kind of the sense for that?
Yeah, a big reason why they've become prevalent, it is a way to, as a product, offloads human need to do this. At its most basic level, what the EL piece is it's typically batch. So, jobs run on some kind of a schedule, not real-time streaming or anything, that take data from databases, APIs, other services, and drop them from wherever your sources are. Salesforce, Shopify, one of 500,000 other SaaS apps out there, and drop it into a centralized location like the data warehouse, for example. In the cloud world right now, that means Snowflake, that means BigQuery, Redshift, Synapse, if you're on Microsoft, and a couple others out there as well. There's many warehouses out there, but that's what it is at the end of the day. And it's how to get data from your applications and from your databases, everything that you maintain, into a different location, usually centralized, should be centralized.
Great. So, I think we're all, one of the things that I want in these webinars is to bring on different minds with different perspectives. I think we're largely aligned about, the value of this tooling, the end game of this tooling, kind of the general flow of data to analytics. But we all have different, perspectives. Lauren running data advisory, trying to solve solve very complex solutions. Me as sort of a vendor of an all-in-one, so not just the EL piece, but then all of the other pieces. Ethan sort of focusing on a best-in-class point solution. So we're going to have some points that are very similar, like what's the value and what's the end game for this data. And I thought, Ethan, you talked through some of those things. I think one of the first questions is when you need this tooling. So, sometimes people put off the tooling and sort of can survive, but you don't need ETL to build, say, dashboards or to build those counts of customers. In fact, often you can do that within the same sort of thing that's generating the data. So like, Ethan, just turning it back to your original answer, when does this even make sense?
Totally. So I would recommend for small companies, do not put in place an ETL or an ELT tool early on, or an EL tool. You don't need Portable day one. What typically happens inside of companies as they evolve from small startup to 20-person company to 100 to 1,000 is you have centers of mass of data within your company. Most startups have a database that stores all their product information. Easiest way to get started with analytics, connect a visualization tool directly to your product database. It works. If the data is there and you can build dashboards and understand your business, and 99% of your business lives in that database, build your dashboards there. The minute you need more, the minute you need data from both your database and your CRM system, maybe you use HubSpot, you now need to figure out how you're going to access the two of those in your dashboard. And you could stand up, most companies at that point would stand up Mozart or stand up Snowflake on its own, and they would say, hey, like we need those two data sources in the same spot so that we can build a dashboard. And at that point, you need both the database information, either accessible in your visualization tool or loaded into Snowflake or Mozart, but you also need this connector to HubSpot. And maybe it's not just HubSpot. Maybe you are hiring engineers, so you also have Greenhouse. So you need your Greenhouse data loaded into Snowflake. At that point, when you start thinking about more data sources that are business applications instead of databases, that's when I recommend getting started with an ELT tool. Don't go overboard. Don't say, hey, we're going to go pay $100,000 and try and ELT every piece of information from across the organization. It's very much a question of maturity and how much valuable information lives in each of these systems. Most of the time, very early on, it's database, then you add some applications, and then over time, as you add more and more and you have more requirements, you need 20 different tools, and that's where we come into play. But early on, yeah, it's really that threshold.
All right, so we do have a little bit of a moment of tension, which is like, I'm a huge advocate of, bringing in these tools and systems earlier and earlier and earlier, which is we know what the end state looks like. And I'm a huge fan of, kind of like you implied, which is once you sort of hit two or multiple sources, then you actually really do want to start to think about or invest in that tooling. I think like as practical advice, yes, obviously when you're using a single tool or when you really have limited data or you're not really prioritizing the use of that data in terms of finding your product market fit, then I do think you can postpone it. Lauren, how do you think about sort of that go early, go late kind of trade-off?
Yeah, so and this is where I get into, the thought leadership and woo-woo kind of world, but it is 420 and I'm not partaking, but this is going to get a little heady here. So each of your systems that you made, your applications, your databases have the lowest level of granularity in them. And so for an order management system or where your revenue lives, I'm a revenue lover. I run businesses off of revenue and EBITDA. That's hearsay nowadays, but I think we're coming back to it. So in the order management system, the most granular piece there is the line item, right? Of what happened at that order. And the line item is something that happened on the order, a transaction was made, and then that line item can be fulfilled, that line item can be voided, charged back, things happen to it. And that's what's happening in your order management system. Now, you can get away with doing that within the application usually, without tying it to something else. Like a lot of SaaS apps, they will want you to spend more time in their application and get more value out of it just in there. But the order management application is only going to tell you so much about that order and that customer. You can see who's a returning customer. You can see who's a first-time customer, what their buying patterns are. But that's all you're really going to get out of there. You hit a wall when you want to know why. Okay, why is this person coming back and making orders every week? Why are they churning from our subscription model? And once the why happens is when you start needing to add other systems. And so going back to the atomic unit of what is in a system, like you can look at events, like a click in an event stream, and that can be tied to what this user did. And so now every time this user came on your site, played around with your app, took whatever actions in a different system, now you want to track how that translates to the revenue, operational, transactional data that you have in your other system. And as soon as you start funneling up from revenue up to actions in your product, actions in your marketing, your customer service, so many businesses don't even look at their customer service, tying their Zendesk stuff back over to revenue and outcomes like that. As soon as you start moving up the funnel, which you should pretty early, that's when you definitely need the EL.
Do you, I actually have, am I allowed to ask questions, Fish?
Of course.
Yes. So I actually have a question for both of you, or for you, Fish, to start. I know you mentioned you are an advocate of starting earlier in the process. Like you're a 3-person company, put in place your data stack, et cetera. Do you think that's more about the technology and kind of the pattern of get started early so you think about it? Or is it more to some of the points that Lauren mentioned of like, make sure that the tools you actually use upstream have APIs you can pull data from. Make sure you have an enterprise data model that allows you to tie together your orders with your customers, with your employees. Is it like, when you think about which one's more important, is it put the EL tool in place and put the warehouse in place or put Mozart in place because it's the tooling, or is it because it's the model and framework in which you can build your enterprise?
I will say that there's a ton of externality that comes from putting the right sort of data thinking in place from moment one. So you hit on one of them, which is you tend to select tooling that is going to make you, that will evolve better, that will make you more successful in the long run, if you have this mindset early on in the way that it feeds the other parts of your decision making. But I did mean it less about the externalities and more about the direct impact of you're able to answer better questions from the start. I mean, people often think that time series of their customers is going to be particularly informative, and that helps for reporting when you have, like, say, a board of directors that you have to answer to maybe once a quarter. But I think actually the bigger thing is kind of answering the questions that like Lauren was talking about, and starting to do that earlier on, or starting to have at least the capabilities of answering it. So I think about the sort of primary, but I actually do think that you hit on something just now, which is there's sort of an externality to having this way of thinking, which also brings up kind of I'll let Lauren answer your question, but I want to say one more thing, which is, this is a conversation on how to choose the right ETL tool, and I don't think that either of you said anything about sort of almost ETL. You started talking about the types of things you're answering and the types of value that the business is getting out of it, and that's kind of one of the themes that I hope is a takeaway from this conversation. You have three people with three slightly different, but all valid perspectives on sort of the data infrastructure space. But we're all talking, about the questions and the value that come from it before we talk about the functionality of the tooling. And I think like that sort of mindset is super important. Lauren, do you have something with respect to Ethan's sort of primary versus sort of externality sort of effects of choosing these tools early?
These are big words. I'm not sure if I'm following.
They're my words in that I think of them,
externality. I mean, you have a
I'm an
PhD in
economist.
economics,
Yeah,
man. I've
so-
only got a BA. The external. I mean, as soon look, the stuff's not that expensive. And we can get into a whole TCO thing later, but the EL tooling out there is not that expensive today, and it's coming down actually. And at this point, like, it is often a lot cheaper to buy instead of build. And if you're a startup and you have to take bets, or you have to figure out how you're going to allocate bets in different places on your go-to-market, on your product, in a bunch of different ways. And, at the price points that EL tools are at these days, to get started, I think it's definitely a bet worth taking pretty early. As soon as, to my earlier point, you need to start, combining data from different systems to understand your funnel and understand what what's going on with your business as you start doing operating activities.
All right, so I want to have us all sort of, again, divorce ourselves from our current positions and current worlds, and I want us to think like genuine advisors to sort of the audience, and in answering the question, sort of what are some of the, and Lauren started hitting on this, but I'll go back to her first. What are some of the sort of dimensions that you think about with respect to this tooling? Like how would you help to, what's a framework or some just like check boxes to start to evaluate, say, vendors, or whether that's again, different possibilities of what a vendor looks like even.
Yeah, so a couple of things here, like a lot of the EL solutions out there have a number of like the same like connectors, the same like library of connectors available, and that might not align with your business necessarily. I call this the ABCDEF problem in EL. A lot of letters, but you might have Salesforce, and you may have Shopify, and you may have SurveyMonkey or MailChimp or something, and you can get a lot out of that. And a lot of the vendors out here will have ABC, but ABC is important for a vendor because they can get more TAM that way. But you might have some niche systems, right? You may have DEF, you may have the Canadian logging industries CRM system. You may have, some help desk startup that no one's ever really heard of, but you love them and they work perfect for you. When you look at this library, like, you need to figure out like what are you going to extract from each of these systems and what are you going to, glean out of that? And, I'll plug Ethan here for a second. Like what Ethan's doing and what Ethan's done is making a deeper library of managed connectors. So it's not just ABC anymore, it's D, E, F, G, H. When you have, the weird stuff in your business, the weird applications that no one's ever heard of, the spooky stuff, maybe it's very important for you. You're running a whole process through there. That's when, you want to look at the deepest possible library of these connectors.
Historically, that would just be, if you want to go with the weird and spooky stuff, you're going to have to figure out an engineering solution on your own. It's, again, just to, sort of back you up with an Ethan plug, it's really incredible, the opportunity that a company like Portable affords, tech, it's not all companies today, it's like, I think I see this all the time, exactly what you're talking about, which is, we talk to customers and, they'll say, all right, what are you using? And they're like, oh, well, we got some Google ads. I'm like, all right, I've heard of, Google. It's like, what else are you using? We're using HubSpot. I'm like, okay, I've heard of that one. What else are you using? We're using Zippity Doodah. Like, I don't know what that is. And I think like this sort of idea of coverage is, I think there's so many SaaS tools out there. There's so many tools that are generating data out there. I think being really savvy about understanding kind of how much coverage you're able to get through tooling is a really important question.
Totally. Let me add a couple things. So I, before starting Portable, I worked at LiveRamp and I was the head of analytics. I was evaluating EL and ETL tools. The first thing, if you have picked a data warehouse and you do not want to change it, you need a tool that supports that data warehouse. It does not matter if they support Zippity Doodah or Salesforce. If you can't load data into Snowflake, it doesn't work. So that's always number one. Number two is going to be, so there's kind of two lenses to view the world through. There's ABC, DEF, and the static lens of every connector company out there, every EL company out there has their catalog and their catalog only. A lot of companies, that's the case, where it's like, we have 100 connectors, it's going to be the same 100 connectors a year from now. Maybe it's 110. So as a purchaser of those tools, you need to take your list of tools that you have today and what you might have in the future and overlap it against everyone's catalog at that point in time and assume generally that will solve your problem in the moment. It's get the coverage you need. The other way to think about it is shipping connectors, people developing connectors quickly and how quickly those catalogs change. And that to us is what we pride ourselves on, is not necessarily the fact that we have X number of connectors, but rather we've built 200 of them in the last year so that we can actually build Zippity Doodah for the next client when they need it. So there's kind of the two aspects. One is what are the tools you can get today for the things you need right now? And then who are the people that can help with the long tail, but also help you in the future as you sign new tools? Because one of the things as a data team is the tech that your company uses constantly evolves. And I've seen so many teams where they put in place their tool and then 3 months later they have their procurement team saying, hey, can we support this returns tool? And they say, I need to go find another EL tool. And that is, that's where you end up in this cycle of kind of going back and forth and searching, et cetera. The only other one thing to plug is when you evaluate tools, it's not just do they connect to HubSpot and Snowflake, but there is one layer deeper that you should look at when you evaluate anyone building connectors is how much data and what data specifically are they pulling from HubSpot? Because you could have a HubSpot connector from a vendor that only pulls one thing, like a list of accounts. If you need to understand who are the people in those accounts and that's not being pulled, it's as if that vendor does not have a HubSpot connector. So it's both, do they support the tools or can they build them? And then also, do they support the endpoints and the schemas that you care about to run your business?
Got it. Maybe you could jump and broaden out sort of, I'll go back to Lauren on some other dimensions. So we obviously coverage comes first, although Ethan says like actually P0 is not just coverage, but obviously a connection to the cloud data warehouse that you care about. What else do you think about kind of in evaluating not just people like Portable, but just a solution just in general.
Yeah, TCO is a big one with this. And like when I'm a big
All right,
proponent.
don't TLA me. What's TCO?
Total cost of ownership. How much is it going to take to, you pay $10,000 for this thing, but how much time are you going to spend, or is somebody on your team going to spend on this? And in a 40-hour week, if they're spending 6 hours a week, you've now bought a product and you've bought, something that is going to take up a person's time. And I fundamentally, believe in tinkering around with this. This is not what you should be focused on when you're starting a company and building a product and you're just trying to get out and market. But it's something you got to keep in the back of your head. Like, so if I buy, $20,000 product and it requires like a lot of maintenance for EL, I'm paying twice. I'm paying for a person's time and I'm paying for that product. And, this is why this library of connectors is so important. And other things like, alerting, other things like, SLAs of like, how stuff moves through the product and, whether or not the data came from point A to point B. And when it doesn't, that's when you need to make sure that, that's accounted for. That can be getting on the call and, I'm a New Yorker, could be getting on a call and yelling at the CS rep. It could be anything, but it's about, making sure that you're not double paying or triple paying in terms of like another product to monitor the first product or a person to monitor the whole thing. Because if you're going to pay for a person and pay for a product, you can just pay for the person. That's a little out there of a way to think about it, but it's about managing costs and reducing complexity, which is one of the whole points about what an EL tool is.
Yeah, to get my economist hat on, there's almost like two-part pricing. There's the sort of direct pricing of the tool, and there's the indirectness that comes from the level of sort of plug and play that it is. When you think about pricing models, and this is a hotly debated one in the EL space, you obviously want the price to relate to the value. Is there sort of a best in class sort of pricing? It does depend on the company. You probably wrestle with this question. How do you think about sort of evaluating tools from a pricing perspective?
Totally.
Beyond the TCO element of it.
Totally. So let's say you're just paying for connectors that move your data. There's a few different strategies that companies like us use to price products. And what that leads to is, for buyers, there are scenarios in which you want to use one, and there are scenarios where you want to use others. One of the fascinating historical aspects of this is, rewind probably 4 years ago, there was Fivetran and there was Stitch in the market, and they had two different pricing models. Fivetran was charging per connector per year pricing effectively. It was X thousands of dollars to move data. If you as a company wanted to move a crazy amount of data, you would go with Fivetran because they had a dollar amount that was fixed. You could move all the data in the world and it wouldn't matter. If you were a small startup and you were moving 10 records a month, you're looking at them saying, wait a second, why is that so expensive? I'm not moving much data. Stitch, on the other hand, was variable pricing. If you were a small company, you wanted variable pricing because you weren't moving that much data. So as a buyer, you definitely want that product. As you got bigger, or you had more data, or you were a Fortune 500 enterprise, you would look at that and say, wait a second, I'm moving so much data that variable pricing is going to cost me way too much money. So those are the two biggest things at play. One is data volume. The other is fixed pricing. And a lot of that comes down to, in today's market, a lot of it aligns with how vendors like us think about strategy. A lot of the companies that focus on moving large amounts of data, that aligns with their strategy. Their goal is help companies move massive amounts of data through change data capture endpoints from Shopify, from Salesforce, et cetera. And for them, it correlates directly with their costs, because for them, that is the business. They help the largest companies move huge amounts of data. us on the other side, our strategy is not move low latency data from database to Snowflake. That is not what we want to get paid for. That's not how we want to help consumers. We want to be incentivized to help someone with the one connector that they can't find anywhere else. We will do the development work. We will maintain it. We'll be on call for it. And in that scenario, if you paid us per record of data moved, it's like it wouldn't work. So for us, we want to be incentivized to maintain those. And then when you think about buying those two tools, it's a question of how do you arbitrage them? Like, do you get the reliability in the connector from the buyer? And then for you, what is the most cost-effective way of allocating? And ideally, the vendors can work with you on those. But those are the two major ways of thinking about it: per connector pricing or usage based.
So, you know, we talked about coverage, we talked about pricing, we talked about sort of plug and playness or TCO. You know, you mentioned sort of this sort of latency requirement that a business might have. I'll turn to Lauren. What does that actually mean in practice?
Yeah, I think of latency and throughput in two different ways. One is like the technical element, like how fast how out of date can the data be? And when you're doing internal operations and, you know, BI analytics for internal stuff, it's pretty rare that like you need real-time streaming, for example, and pay more for that. Usually you can get away with as of midnight last night or as of an hour ago. In the marketing world, if you're using that like real time or close to real time and you need to like make decisions about like how a campaign is performing in the day, and something's like way off and you need to start, you know, shoveling money at Facebook or something, you know, that's low latency. But most cases you can get away with pretty quick, you know, 15 minutes out of current time and things like that. And the other piece of, you know, latency here is, you know, how much complexity is accrued in the T piece. And at a small business, a small startup, really, I mean, I would say anyone who's doing under 5 million or so in revenue and not, you know, tinkering around too much with ML and stuff, like the T piece has to remain as low complexity as possible, because that's also where latency can be, you know, created. Now, the other piece of latency here is how much time does it actually take a person or someone to put this all together? The throughput of, we had Shopify, we had Facebook, we had, you know, whatever other apps we have. Now we got a new one. Now we want to add our customer service. We've got to put that in the model and we got to put that in the BI dashboards. That has time elements to it. And you need to think about how long something is going to take when you add the nth application or the nth system. And when you custom build this, then you're manually doing the EL, you're manually doing a T, you're manually, you know, putting this in some kind of new BI report or insight or whatever. And offloading that as much as possible is pretty critical at reducing that throughput of getting that, you know, N+1, that nth system into, you know, your BI stack.
Okay. So one of the things, you know, you talk about all these different systems. I hear that. The first thing I think about is security and privacy. You know, we didn't talk about that in the framework for making a decision around an EL tool. Most of the, you know, the really reputable ones are going to sort of have those check boxes. But Ethan, how would you think about, even in terms of building your own application or just in general, how do you think about security and privacy?
Totally. So I would say there's a lot of different things at play here, actually. There are kind of three major considerations. There's geography, there's regulation across the world that makes moving data from system to system and vendor to vendor very, very complex. Moving data right now from, if you are in the EU, moving data to a cloud-hosted SaaS solution in the US, very difficult, at risk, given a lot of the regulatory things taking place. So that's going to be one of the biggest considerations is around privacy, is both where are you and where is your vendor, and from an infrastructure perspective. Number two is going to be, what type of company are you? If you work in financial services, if you work at one of the largest banks, or you work with healthcare and HIPAA data, it is very difficult to use SaaS vendors in general. That is one of the best case. Like I don't believe open source is the solution to integrations as a whole. I do believe open source is a phenomenal solution in that scenario. If you are a bank and your alternative is write code to build an integration, and you can't use a SaaS vendor from a security and privacy perspective, take code from open source vendors, put it in place. The third step is cloud hosted solutions, SaaS vendors. That's what we do. That's what a lot of players in the modern data stack today, that's how they approach the world. And at that point, it comes down to, how do they think about protecting your data? That really comes down to a few things. Number one, storing your data. Are they taking your data from HubSpot and persistently storing it in their system? Do their employees have access to it? How is it controlled? Is it encrypted, et cetera? How long is it in their system before they deliver it? And do they delete it after the fact? So like for us, for instance, we're ephemeral pipes. We extract data. I can't see the data from our customers. Our system extracts it, processes it, loads it, deletes it, it's gone. So the other key consideration is around, just like moving data, one of the most important considerations around security is credentials. Being like API tokens, authentication credentials, and really digging into kind of the security and privacy mechanisms in place with your vendors around that. On top of those two, storing data and credentials and security around it, is really the frameworks and the audits to make sure what people say exists. That could be documentation, questionnaires, it could be SOC 2, ISO, et cetera. But it's really, in my mind, it comes down to those two things. How do people store their data and have access to it? And then number two, how do they handle your credentials? Because they're extremely sensitive.
Ethan, you said a term I'd love just to dive in a little bit more into, which was open source. So obviously, some of the major players in the EL space, or the major solutions, are in fact open source. Yet you're building something that isn't. How would you think about, and I'll, rather than ask you or myself, who might be a little bit biased here, maybe I'll turn first to Lauren to sort of set up the open source versus not open source debate.
Yeah, so, I love open source for a lot of things. And, I actually learned a lot in my own career, going through like open source, repos and projects and things like that. So I'm not, anti-open source in general by any means. But with integrations here, to Ethan's points, like a lot of this stuff has a lot of regulatory stuff behind it. And, I think about this as a supply chain or farm to table. We're gonna go in a realm here where I talk about farm to table.
We wouldn't have had you on if you weren't going to go off into your own realm. So I please.
Right, farm to table, or server farm to data table, because that makes the metaphor even better. How did that table in your warehouse, your customer table in Snowflake or whatever, what farm did that come from? What server farm, et cetera. And with the way these integrations are built in open source and the way they're maintained right now, the solutions out there rely heavily on, the goodness of people out there to maintain them. And so if you're using something that's open source at the end of the day, what you risk is something like that going down and then not being corrected until someone, gets around to changing it again. And, part of the idea with how some of these companies, pitch themselves or what the value prop is that, with network effects, there will be so many people doing this, and it'll be, people will go on and, then we'll release it back and then it'll be a solved problem. I actually have not seen this in practice work very well. Like, Singer was maintained very well a couple of years ago. Then they got sold to Talend, and the quality of what you get out of the box with Singer is a little low. It's you know, you can use Singer. I'm not, you know, insulting Singer, but
we in fact use some Singer. So.
Yeah, right. You can use Singer, but like what you're getting out of that is something that's not like readily maintained anymore. Those are my main thoughts there.
I think we have a pretty biased audience, but now let's Ethan, I'll challenge you to set up the debate as fairly as possible.
No, totally. So like there's, as I said, healthcare, finance, financial services, and a lot of companies outside the US do not have the benefit of having a SaaS solution where there are people on call to maintain their connectors. You just do not have the option. So in those scenarios, your options are either do everything from scratch or use open source. Open source is a no-brainer in that scenario. It gives you a framework to think about integrations. It gives you free code out of the box that hopefully works. And if not, at least you have a framework to be able to test it and run it, things of that sort. In those scenarios, do not build from scratch. Use open source. You are on call when it breaks. But it's a no-brainer in those scenarios. In other scenarios, it really like there's a cultural split in data teams right now in the ecosystem around, are you an engineering team or are you a like modular building block composable architecture team? And if you're an engineering team and you want to spend a ton of headcount maintain, like if you want to be on call at 2 a.m. when things break in your pipeline, use open source. If you don't, use a SaaS solution. So like that is the highest level way I think about it. Like personally, our entire company has signed up to be on call when things break for our clients. So like that is our job. That is the contract we sign with our clients. That is like when things break, if I can't troubleshoot it directly, like I have to go reach out to the actual data source and be like, hey, did you have maintenance this weekend? Hey, are things broken? I have to ping random people on LinkedIn to try and get in touch with a support person. If you want to do that as a data person, do it. Like, go for it. It's really fun. But like that is the trade-off you're making when it comes to open source versus a cloud hosted solution. Is like at 2 o'clock when things break, or when someone goes into a 4-day maintenance window or changes their schemas, who do you want to be responsible for that problem?
Well, that's actually a good to framework that or put it into our framework. That would sort of fall into like the support category, and you should really understand the support model of your EL tooling. So with that, we're actually literally at time, but I am going to turn to Q&A, and then I'm going to make some announcements at the end, both of the prize winners, and then also just some things that I'm very excited about in this space. So maybe first I'll turn to Q&A. So we have a few questions in the chat. We'll see if we can knock them out really quickly. So Jason asks, what would you suggest for companies that need to use external data from non-business applications? How does this change the tooling you choose? So either one of you want to tackle that?
Sure. So I would think this is asking about like enrichment or about something that exists out in the world that maybe you're buying data once, or you found a data source once somewhere. And I think that comes down to how often do you like need to update that? Like if it's, if you're running a company that sells bathing suits on Shopify, like you might want to find an external like data source about weather, because that's going to potentially impact where you sell through your products. And really it comes down to like, is this a one-time upload of data? Is it something you can do once? And if that's true, like you can get it as a CSV and you want to put it in your data warehouse, do that. Just do it once, or maybe even if it's like once a month, maybe, or whatever, go ahead and just do that. But as soon as you need to start like doing it often from these external sources, that's when you look at, API. Is there some kind of external table? Is it, an SFTP server that needs to be set up that's going to put a CSV in there every day? And that's when you should actually start looking at, EL stuff, because that's, what they're good at.
I have nothing against clunky solutions, right? Like, so kind of grinding your way through, CSV sort of workarounds is something that I'm sure we're all very familiar with. let me jump to the next question, which is, how do people feel about data mesh, and what is its impact on ETL?
So this might be a very ridiculous answer, but I personally don't care at all about data mesh. Because it is like, first of all, don't fully understand what the concept is and why, like at large scale, there are a lot of data considerations that come into play. Most companies should not care about whether they use a data mesh, an iPaaS tool, a CDP, machine learning, AI, ETL, ELT, reverse ETL. I don't like, it does not matter. Like it was first data lakes, then it was data warehouses, then it's data meshes, then it like, what is the business problem you're trying to solve? That is the only thing you should focus on. And 2 years later, when everything's on fire, like if you didn't use Mozart and you end up with everything on fire and you didn't hire Lauren to fix everything already, like fix it, but like make sure you're focused on the business problems. Like to me, data mesh isn't a business problem. It is a architectural concept. And when I think about selling to, like when I think about the value being created from data stacks, it is, yeah, AI and ML is another phenomenal example of a scenario where like, if you have a business value, like business use case for it, use it as a building block, but no one should be making a decision around their data stack based on, like, it should all be driven by, can you create business value, not what is the latest terminology someone is raising money around.
Sure. All right. Well, great answer, great energy to sort of end the Q&A on. We do have one more Q&A question that I'm gonna take. So the question is, how is Mozart different from EL players like Portable? So Mozart is an all-in-one solution, which basically covers the T part, and also it has the offering of a managed data warehouse. So you can really not just get your connectors, but also kind of get them using them without sort of hiring data engineers or someone like Lauren. You can get up and running like incredibly rapidly, sort of in a low code environment. So Mozart is sort of an all-in-one solution. Now, let me just say that we love the EL community, but I especially want to take this time, and I'm excited to announce actually the Mozart and Portable partnership. So Mozart and Portable effectively work together to make that data journey as easy as possible. So with Mozart Data, you can now spin up a modern data stack in under an hour and get access to over 300 data connectors, many of which are effectively powered with our partnership with Portable. And customers can get through Portable some connectors that are incredibly challenging or difficult to find elsewhere in that sort of library and coverage discussion. So Ethan, really excited to be partnering with you.
Me as well. I'm extremely excited. And by the way, on that scenario, like there are connectors we don't have. There are like Salesforce. We do not support Salesforce. Mozart Data also taps into Fivetran. Like the coverage that Mozart provides today is unparalleled in the market. So the ability to both go to a single vendor and get access to best-in-class cloud-hosted EL connectors from us and Fivetran, but also get Snowflake and the transformation capabilities and the analytics capabilities and expertise from Fish and the team, like it's a no-brainer for most companies to get stood up with their data stack just from and not having to deal with all the vendors. Yeah.
All right. Why don't I announce the winners? So the DoorDash gift cards are Sergio Avila and Ash Mukherjee. And the upright and jerseys, which I'm super excited about, go to Amir Goldberg and Angela Castillo. So you'll be rocking some pretty amazing swag. I'm super jealous. I'm gonna have to figure out how to get myself going in that direction. So with that, actually, let me first thank thank our panelists. We want to leave everybody with like an additional resource. We focused today on sort of the EL space. But obviously, if you're looking to spin up a modern data stack, please check us out on our resources at mozartdata.com/resources, or give Mozart Data a trial. Thank you for joining us today, and thanks for all the sort of help that Ethan and Lauren have shared about thinking about the ETL or EL space. So thanks again for joining. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.